Welcome to Successful Dropout. This community is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those who dare to defy the status quo, step off the conveyor belt, and claim the best version of their life. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Welcome to the movement that is Successful Dropout. Hey, Successful Dropouts. A few things here before we kick off the regular show. First, if you haven't already, join the forum at successfuldropout.com. That's where we all hang out as a community, and I would hate for you to miss anything. It only takes a few seconds to create a free profile, and then you should get in there and introduce yourself, and I would love to hang out with you. Also, if you love this community and want to play a significant role in helping it continue to grow, consider supporting us financially through Patreon. 100% of those proceeds will go towards our overhead for Successful Dropout and also to pay for part-time staff to take things to the next level and make this community even more valuable. By supporting us, you can also get cool things like shout-outs in the community and on the podcast, merch, and even one-on-one mentoring with me on a regular basis. So please go check out patreon.com/Successful Dropout. Again, that's patreon.com/Successful Dropout, or click the link in the show notes. And now that that's all out of the way, let's move on to Season 2 of Successful Dropout, where we dive deep into the things formal schooling and society never taught you, and where you come away with clear, actionable steps to put these essential life skills into practice today. What is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Damien Foord once again. He's been on the show twice already, once to talk about branding, which is one of our more popular episodes, and another time to talk about freelancing, and we went way into depth, step by step, like how to become a freelancer, get gigs on Upwork and stuff like that. And you've definitely seen him around the Facebook group, sharing his wisdom. Typically, you'll find long blocks of text in certain comments from him that should be made into maybe short chapters in some book or something. I'm sure he's going to write one day if he hasn't already. The guy's been just a real, played a real special role in the community so far, and so I'm really happy to have him back on. So Damien, it's good to have you back on, man. And for people that don't know you and haven't listened to the other episodes, which we will link to those because you definitely should, for those of you listening, why don't you tell people a little bit more about yourself and what you do and a little bit of your background and history here?
Yeah, so my story is a long one, so I'll bypass it. And it's all a combination of design and business, which, I'm very lucky, just happens to be very in vogue now. And we call that, design thinking or innovation. Or, and so I've started several businesses to varying levels of success. I also spent 6 years in the Air Force, and had a lot of really a mixed bag of experience there through kind of law enforcement and human intelligence collection, and an experimental research program also. Through all of that,
that all sounds so cryptic, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can talk about it. It's not like I'm James Bond, but it just takes forever. But those are the key points, right? I was able to get these really interesting skill sets and blend those with my approach to design and business and come up with something super unique. So I've applied that methodology with Adobe and Tesla and LinkedIn and Epson and a handful of other Fortune 500 companies and about 400 other companies of smaller scale.
That's amazing. So these are companies you've worked with.
Yeah.
It's amazing, man.
As clients. And then I've spent the last 7 months kind of consulting with LinkedIn and helping them build their approach to experimentation and innovation.
That's nuts, man. So tell us a little bit about your past education. Are you a dropout?
Oh yeah. That's an important piece. Yeah. So school never worked for me. I was always the kid that the teacher was screaming at every day. I think I like to say I'm obsessed with efficiency. Another way of saying that is I'm lazy. So I don't like doing more work than I have to, and homework just seemed completely unnecessary as long as I knew I understood the topic. So school just didn't work. And then so it was great for social, right? So I went all the way through high school, but by sophomore, junior year of high school, I was making money as a designer and getting by pretty well. I started designing for money at about 13, and so by the time it came close to graduation, I dropped out and I was already freelancing, and then I started a second business, an apparel company, and thought I was a hot shot. And then that all crashed, and I thought I was just ruined and I would never be able to get a job, or I knew school wouldn't work for me. So I joined the Air Force. That's kind of how that happened. But I've taken a few college classes here and there, but at the end of the day, it just a formal kind of degree path just never made sense for me.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense. It's loosely similar to my own story as well. So branding, really quick. How did you get into branding, and like why are you so interested in it, I guess?
Yeah, well, I was the beneficiary of other people's ignorance, and most people, when you say brand, they immediately go to visual identity. And I really liked, so I started as a designer, found myself in visual identity, and really kind of loved that. There's a long story in terms of how, why I'm obsessed with kind of creating identity systems. But I think that it was kind of a natural progression. The more design I did, the more I was focused on how it touches people, how it impacts people. And I was really interested in that effect more than I was interested in the visual design itself. So my design freelancing grew into a design agency. My design agency turned into more of a marketing agency. And that marketing agency really became more focused, eventually evolved into brand strategy. And really, it was just, I have a really, really strong understanding of people and how to impact people, especially how design and marketing tactics impact people in unseen and subconscious ways.
So why is branding important? Like, for somebody listening, why should they pay attention to and learn how to, I guess, do branding, for lack of a better term? I mean, you can already tell, like, I view it as a pretty nuanced subject. It's something that I feel like I don't even understand very well. But why should people be, I guess, interested in it?
Man, see, now I know you're trying to goad me into a long monologue. Why isn't brand important? I'm going to come back to that question in just a second. First, let's start with, what is brand to you? And there are no wrong answers.
I mean, brand, if you're asking me, I would say brand to me simply is like, I view it as a logo and maybe a color scheme and just sort of a vibe that, say, if I'm visiting the website of a company, for example, it's kind of the vibe that I get from them. And if they're doing a really good job, it helps me get some insight into their why and ultimately why they exist. But I guess in a nutshell, that would be my answer.
Totally. And I feel like that's really close to a lot of answers that I get. I ask this question of people all the time, and I've taught at different schools, or I come in and give talks and workshops on brand. And it's really, really fascinating to me that the word brand has just evolved multiple times. And so it creates all this confusion into what it actually means. And then if you follow that history trajectory, you can kind of forecast where you think it's going. So to start, okay, brand started as identification, right? And over, it's how you tell, one business from another, right? Identification. And then it evolved through the golden age of advertising and the madmen of Madison Avenue, right? That time when advertising and PR really became onto the world stage, they started to recognize the power of reputation. And brand came not just to represent the identification of a company, but its reputation. And that's kind of, you said both things, right? You said, logo and identity, and then you said also its vibe. And so it really, you're talking about those two different things. And I get about 80-20, depending on what the audience is. Most people get the identification piece and then work on the reputation piece. What people don't realize is that there's actually like this third, far more abstract, far harder to understand piece of brand. Whereas, David Ogilvy, one of like the madmen of Madison Avenue, said it in the 60s, right? And so we just all haven't been paying attention. He said brand is the intangible sum of a business, your product, the way it's advertised, right? So when I first read that, it blew me away. Like, what the hell is an intangible sum, right? And it's like, what's the intangible sum of Coca-Cola? That's not just the way it makes me feel. You know what I mean? Like, the way it makes me feel is just a part of that sum. Even more important, like, what's the intangible sum of Damien, right? It's not just, it's identification is like my driver's license, right? That's how you tell me from the next, Irish dude walking down the street. But like the intangible sum of me is so much more than just my reputation or the way I might make you feel, right? It's who I am. It's who I am as certainly as a professional, but it's also who I am as a father. It's who I am behind closed doors as a partner. It's who I am when I'm by myself.
Yeah.
Brand is this like core beingness that is intrinsic and we're used to understanding in people. But now increasingly, and there's a lot of different data and stuff I could cite, but for the sake of time, I'll just say the way business is trending right now, people are looking for that. And this happened before, right? It used to be that people didn't really care about identifying with their nation. And then post-Enlightenment, all of a sudden we really needed like flags, and the individual wanted to identify with the country. And now you see the same thing happening with business, right? The individual wants to identify with that business. The way I identify with you is something about my intrinsic factors, my motivators, my drivers are connecting with yours. And so that's how we have a seat at each other's table. And so how a business has that same seat at that table is that business needs to have these intrinsic motivators defined. And so it's really about like, I don't want to say defining the personality of a company because it's really trite and people take that for this surface level bullshit. In reality, it's like it's defining the psychological identity of a company.
Yeah, so I mean, this is really, really interesting stuff, and I'm glad we're getting in deep here. Would you say it's fair, like a fair assumption that it's much easier for people to understand this, understand a brand in its deepest level than to, I guess, know how to articulate it for themselves? Or whatever they're building?
These things are happening in different areas of our brain, right? And Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Peace Prize winner, right? He says that we have our experiencing brain and our what's he called the other one? Like our remembering brain, essentially. I'm pretty sure I'm destroying that. But the idea is that when we're trying to describe something, you're trying to remember it, right? And my connection to you is something that happens through an experience. It's happening in the moment. And so if I try to explain my connection to you or my connection to my son, we find that very difficult, right? Because it's not happening in that center of our brain. It doesn't, happen within that center. So it's the same thing. The same way we struggle to identify and nail down what love is, right? Brand is very similar. It is this intangible, abstract connection. The hardest things, right? Something that is concrete and tangible is very easy to describe, like an apple, right? It's concrete, it's tangible. I can look at it and describe it. Something that is either intangible, but exists in concrete terms is easier, or something that is abstract, it is but tangible, right? These things become easier to explain, but something that is abstract and intangible, I mean, it's very difficult to explain.
An intangible sum of a company or a person, to use your words earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about like 4 layers deep meta abstraction, right? And then people are, if you Google definition of brand right now, Google will give you one, which is it's insufficient, but you'll find one of those results is an article that's like 31 definitions of brand. Like, there should be 31 definitions of anything, and it just speaks to the confusion. So I am actually, it's funny you said the thing about a book. I just decided this morning, 100%, I'm definitely writing a book on exactly what we're talking about right now. Just because, I think it's needed. And going deeper, go deeper, right? Simon Sinek helped us a lot by telling us to start with why, right? But it's actually deeper than that. Your why is born out of your brand, right? Your brand is your raison d'etre, right? Your reason for being, right? And then your why is kind of born out of it. And so my brand as a person is born in my raison d'etre. I'm still existing, and so that's there somewhere, right? And I just have to find it, right? And then some would say that's kind of like the journey of life, right? And so doing that with a business is really about triangulating the business's raison d'etre from understanding that of the most influential people within it. But it goes kind of deeper than that, but so I'll go on.
So I only know how to think about this in terms of things I've already built or am in the process of building. And for instance, when I think about Successful Dropout, here's this community and this podcast that I started 2 years ago now. And for whatever reason, people have flocked to it, and we have a thriving community that's still growing. We have thousands of listeners to the podcast, and to be quite honest, there's been plenty of seasons, for months at a time that I have just put the minimal amount of effort necessary to just keep things going, because I just get off on, there's other projects going on in my life all the time. And it still amazes me, I'll be pretty absent for like a month or two, and I'll have a ton of you guys pinging me and texting me and even calling me and like, what's happening with SD next? Like, what can I do to help? Like, people that have just latched onto the vision and the brand and the why of Successful Dropout and have just found this connection to it. And it absolutely blows my mind every single time and motivates me to just get back into it and keep pushing things forward. But I don't understand it. Like, at the end of the day, I have this feeling of what I build with, particularly SD I'm talking about, is coming out of the very essence of who I am. It's an extension of me. But I don't know how to like quantify that or break it down into something that I can amplify or showcase better. And so that's why I think you should write a book, man, because like, I want to understand that more.
What you're talking about and what we're talking about together is kind of demystifying a very intuitive process. Up to this point, the only people that are doing brand well are people who just, they're magicians, right? They're sorcerers. They're somehow doing this thing and they don't necessarily understand how they're doing it. But it's an intuitive process. And so imagine, you're alive 1,500 years ago and you're like a priest of some kind, and you're following your intuition to manipulate these like electrical charges, right? And people can see a static charge coming from your fingertips, and and you do certain things and they can feel it themselves. And it's like, whoa, this is like magic. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, right. And then once we demystify it with science, it's like, well, we can all do that. And not only can anybody create this charge and understand how to manipulate it, but once we've manipulated it, we created lighting everywhere. We created computers. We created phones. Right. And I mean, how much did the harnessing and understanding of electricity change the world? And I truly think, I don't think brand necessarily is as impactful as electricity, but I think brand is the leading edge of something else that is. And that's like, that's that's another podcast episode. But at the end of the day, what does all of that mean? It means the most successful priest back in the day, before people understood what electricity was, were the ones that knew how to manipulate this thing, even though they didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And so similarly today, the most successful people in business are the ones who understand how to manipulate this human connection within the business, even if they don't understand it. And so what I'm doing is really trying to provide a framework to where that happens predictably. And 450 some odd times now running this process, it's super predictable.
That's amazing, man. So let's dive into that then. Let's dive into how can people listening make this as predictable as possible, and as you're able to, like, how do you break this down into like a step-by-step actionable process that somebody listening could go today and start working on their personal brand or a brand for a business they're building? I mean, I'm talking about myself here, like today, right, and get just 1% better. Let's just dive into that.
Okay, so the first thing to understand is, like you were saying, successful dropouts, right? Like you have this brand energy going on, but you don't really even understand how you do it. I would say, how connected to the group, the community's reason for being do you feel like you are?
I feel pretty connected to it. Yeah, because I feel like it's an extension of me, because I feel connected to it because I feel like it's what I live out every day, personally.
So, brand potency is directly related to your proximity to the reason for being.
Say that one more time.
So the clearer, brand potency is directly related to your proximity to its reason for being.
That's deep.
So the better and more clearly you understand, I mean, you can line up companies and their level of success is, and whether it's positive or negative. Like, I mean, I can show you even when their reason for being is taking advantage of people and screwing them over. Like, if they're very clear about that and they know that, they are more successful, right? And so it's like, I don't necessarily advocate for those brands, but I understand that it works regardless of how you do it, right? So there's a series of kind of 6 steps that are meant to bring you closer in proximity. And each one acts as kind of like a filter. So each stage kind of brings you closer and closer. And if you're, further away or needing to gain in more success, then optimizing one of those is probably the key. So what I always do is I start, step number 1 is background, is really understand, like, who are you, what's the product you serve, and where do you want to take this in the future, right? All the kind of basic knowledge that you have within anybody, the first 5 minutes talking about your business or project or whatever it is. And what's important is you want to write these answers down, right? Obviously, you know those answers, and it seems like, why should I write these down? I already know them. Just trust me, you want to write it down. The second step then is appraisal, right? So look at your brand, think about it, and what is a strong brand to you? I've done, research studies across thousands of companies. And so when I do this, I use these core, these common factors that I've seen in other companies. But if you don't have access to research like that, then just look at, what is a strong brand to you? And then look at like how do you meet those things, right? So maybe if a brand is visionary to you, like how visionary is Successful Dropouts and why? And what's important here isn't necessarily whether or not Successful Dropouts is visionary. It's what are the words you use to describe that? Okay. So you write that down. Okay. And you really want to explore that, right? You really want to go through what are a couple of different companies that you think are kind of power brands. Why do you feel like they're power brands? And then how good are you at meeting any of those factors? Okay. The next step then is resonance, right? And you want to understand how do you want your brand to resonate with your audience, right? So how do you want them to think and feel about your brand? And think about it in a variety of different contexts, right? So if you're a plumber, you want to think about them looking at your Yelp page, and you want to think about the experience of the estimate or phone consultation and the experience of actually being there. I worked with a salsa company before, and we talked a lot about how different the experience is walking through the aisle and looking at their brand on a shelf versus like the sound of popping open the jar and smelling it. Like, what are the experiences that you want people to have?
That's a great analogy. I just don't mean to interrupt, but like, I can just say I can see this immediately in practice in the real world, because we have use for a lot of different contractors and stuff with some of the things that we do, and there's 2 plumbing companies that we use in town, and we use them for different purposes, and they can do everything, but there's one that most of their vans are pretty broken down. It's a rough and tough like bunch of guys. Not like pleasant as much to do business with, but they get in and get the job done. And it's like, we had a pipe burst under our parking lot at one point. You have to dig into that and just get really dirty. It's like, those are the guys that we called to do it. Then there's another group they're more clean, very professional, very pleasant customer experience. Those are the ones that I call, to like fix a leaky faucet or something in one of our houses, right? And the reality is they could do the same job, but it's just interesting. I immediately think of one or the other for a particular job based off of a variety of different things, like you were saying, from how it looks on the shelf to how it sounds like and smells like, and when you open the bottle and stuff.
It's such a good example, right? Like, brand is acting upon us at all times. And it's like, people are like, huh? Acting? What? What does that mean? No, it is acting on you. It caused you to make that decision, right? And so understand, like, everybody has a brand at work. It is responsible, and to a large part, for your success and your failure. And so when you ask, like, why is brand important? It's like, yeah, well, when you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I'm aware of how much that's true. But I also think, and I bet my future on it, that brand is ultimately responsible for the vast majority of business successes and failures. So you tell me, how much money would you spend on it? How much time should you spend on it? Right? I don't know. How successful do you want to be?
Yeah.
That's literally what I tell my clients. So
that's a good pitch, man. I like it.
Yeah.
You've got me sold.
So spend the resonance. I spend at least an hour solid just on that. And really thinking about, what do you want your, potential stakeholders to feel and think about your brand, and strategically plan that experience. Reverse engineer that to be sure that it happens. Otherwise, you just show up and you're the rough and dirty plumber, and you don't understand why you're not getting the more delicate jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with being those guys, but they might be able to sit down and plan, like, how can we capture both?
Right, exactly.
Right? So do you know how – the other important thing about the resonance, the appraisal, and background, all of these, it's very important that you're writing all of them down, okay? Do you know how the Unabomber was caught?
I do not.
Okay. The Unabomber was the first case in the United States, and some would argue the world, splitting hairs, where someone was caught from forensic linguistics. So an FBI profiler got together with a Stanford linguistics professor, and Ted Kaczynski kept sending them, his kind of manifestos and papers on his thinking, and they went through the words that he was using and used that to identify certain things about him, right? And through that, they were able to catch him. So, our reality takes shape in the words that we use to describe it, period.
That's so true.
Okay?
Yep.
And so the value of this is capture the words. I don't care whether or not your brand is visionary, right? I care what are the words that you're using to describe it. And through that, then you just do some grouping, right? This is where design thinking comes in. Pattern recognition, right? And I could go on and on and on about why you split them into 3 categories, but I could do a whole class on that. 3 categories. Limit yourself to 3 categories of all the different words and everything that you have. And it might be helpful for you to do this whole thing on Post-it notes, right? Every answer, limit it to words and phrases, and then group those. And force yourself to find a pattern and limit it to 3. And decide these are either in one bucket or another. Don't force them to be equal, but I would be surprised. I would say if they're wildly out of balance, then probably something's wrong and you want to revisit it and look at it again. And this is what we call pillars, right? These 3 categories, because I don't do values. Okay. Fuck that. Values are useless words that you put on a poster on the wall and your employees roll their eyes at. That's what values are. The problem with values is they're mostly aspirational. This is who we like to believe that we are, right? And that reminds me of every wannabe anything on the planet, right? You never end up there because there's nothing actionable that gets you there. Pillars are not values. They're not, this is what we think is important. Pillars are, these are the things that if we don't do it, our brand is destroyed. Our brand is fucked. And you can arrive at those through this, kind of quick and dirty linguistic analysis of yourself, right? So you go through, you write down the words you're using to describe different aspects of the business in different contexts. And then you do this pattern recognition and you arrive at 3 pillars. These are concepts that if you were to violate them, your company would, just about disappear overnight. And I use the example of Nike got in trouble for child labor in the 90s for those people who were alive at that time. But they made some flashy commercials, and then a couple of weeks later, everybody forgot about it and was back to buying Nikes again, right? Whereas, can you imagine if Tom's Shoes got in trouble for child labor?
Jeez, yeah. I get your point.
There'd be no amount of flashy commercial that could save them. And so the thing is, lucky for Tom's Shoes, that's an extreme and obvious enough example that someone there is that would probably be a bad idea. Right? But how many times in businesses do you think people are doing more subtle versions of that? There are subtle pillars of their brand that they're violating, that they're not even aware of, that then people stop coming around, people aren't interested, people aren't buying, and they're like, what the fuck is going on? I'm very cursy today.
You're getting into it, man. I like it.
Yeah. That's your pillars, right? Take the time to get your pillars right. And there's no quick fix. It's going to take hours, frustratingly going back around this and around this. And then you're going to have to leave it and you're going to have to come back to it and try all over again because that's just the way this stuff works. The next, that's all great. Now, when you hit the part of pillars, you've really identified something core to what this business is about, because it's at the intersection of all the BS that you're saying about your company, right? Everything in there, it all kind of comes down to what's at the intersection of that, and that's where you find what it's all truly about, right? All of that is useless, though, if you're just like, cool, now I know this is what my company is about, and I don't know what to do with it. So the next step is expression. We split brand up into two sides. There's definition and expression, defining what it is and then expressing that out. The expression piece is brand is expressed in three ways: language, ritual, and symbol, right? And so what are the different abstract and concrete ways that you're expressing your brand? And then how do you make sure that it's aligned with those pillars, right? So instead of like, oh, I'm doing blue because I like the color blue, and maybe you get lucky and blue just happens to be aligned with your brand. Instead, like, what are these pillars? And then what color is meaningful to that pillar, right? What kind of typography is meaningful to that pillar? What shapes are meaningful to that pillar? What kind of actions and processes that become ritual are important to that pillar, right? And
do you want to just explain
back
really quick about why that's important? I think maybe some people listening may not understand how much color even just plays a role in, say, a customer's thinking when they visit your site or something like that. You want to go into that a little bit more in depth?
Yeah. That's always a tough one for me because I live so much in research and have for years that it's like hard for me to nail
quantify,
the things that are obvious to people and aren't. But basically, color is one of the most powerful things that acts on us subconsciously. And you can look at this like, the amount of fast food restaurants that use yellow and red, right? That it's yellow and red are both aggressive colors. They catch your attention first, so there's an element of primacy, but they also have been shown to activate your kind of your salivary system, but the sensations that come along with hunger, right? And so I'm just
thinking of stay hungry, stay foolish, and the Successful Dropout red now. That's great.
There you go. So I mean, the color is acting on us in a ton of different ways, but even if we don't go that deep with it, right? Say we think all that psychology mumbo jumbo is BS. In reality, just because we are good pattern recognition machines, things that are very corporate, they always love this very cool blue. Okay, they all do that because of deeper psychological reasons, but we won't go there, right? We'll just say that just by adjacency, you want to fit in with where you're at, right? So say, for instance, this isn't true, but if like every plumber used the color green, right? If you were yellow, some people think like, oh, it makes you stand out. And so that's good. And it's like, no, standing out too much makes you untrustworthy, right? I know what I'm getting from these plumbers that all look the same. I want to make sure that I'm getting that same thing from you, ultimately. And then you want to build on top of that something unique. So you don't want to be so different that you alienate yourself. And so if for no other reason, in the most basic sense, you want to pay special attention to color to make sure that you look appropriate in the area that you're operating in, because that's a big part of where trust comes from. Even bigger than that, I get less pushback on color than I do about typography. People think fonts don't matter. And I would argue with you that in most companies, depends, but in most companies, they're like each little one of those characters in a sentence is an opportunity to impact somebody, right? And so if they're seeing written word, there's so much dynamic expression happening when they're reading a page. And if it's just Arial, then it just fades into the background. It's too familiar. But if you find ways to make it subtle changes enough that it's unique, but not so much that it's disruptive and it makes it ineffective, then that's a really powerful way that people can see you, recognize you, be triggered like this is something new and different, and remember you. So you got to be subtle with typography. Subtlety is key with all of this, but it's super powerful if you can get it right. Does that make sense and answer your question?
No, yeah, amazing. Let's keep going on expression then. So all those things are part of expression, and then I didn't mean to get you off track.
No, you're good. So language, ritual, and symbol, right? What are the messages that you're using? How might these pillars be expressed in design and shape? Those are symbolic. And then how might those pillars be expressed in your actions, right? So if you make t-shirts and one of your pillars is, efficiency, like baking that in and accentuating it and highlighting the efficiency in your process is very important. I think kind of efficiency in process is kind of obvious, but so using something less obvious, right? If one of your pillars, say, is empathy, and you've been so focused on being efficient that there's nothing empathetic in your process at all, that is actually like a really common thing that I see, right? And so coming back and saying, how can I make, at what point in this process do we integrate more empathy into really every step? But so that's expression. How are you expressing those pillars out in the world in different ways? And then the last step, sixth, is application, right? So now that you understand the ways that you want to express it, where do you apply that? And so like you were talking about the plumbers, if they want to be seen as kind of like more clean and detail oriented, then upgrading their vans is a way of applying these pillars, right? And so you want to think about what media does your brand live in, right? So buying a company car and having a really sweet vinyl wrap on it isn't necessarily something Successful Dropouts needs to do. It doesn't make sense, right? Like the community is too distributed. So again, that's an obvious example to make it clear what it is that we're doing, but I would try to think about the more subtle ones, right? So what are the ways that your brand is expressed? What are the ways that or your brand is applied? And what are other ways that you could apply it, right? And then how do you, when you're looking at the different ways that you apply your brand, how can you tie that back to those expression dynamics from the previous question, right? How do you make sure that now that you have your pillars, you understand how those are expressed, and how do you make sure that they're being expressed through the proper application? And all of that is kind of one building upon the other. And that's really it. That's like the secret sauce that that has literally, that process has made millions of dollars. And that's actually just direct revenue, right? Like how much has it created in value for the clients? Like I've never done that calculation, but I probably should, because I would bet it's an extremely large number. And it can be anybody, right? Every one of my companies, like I said, they're varying levels of success. But what they all had in common is they all had extremely powerful brands, even if they were short-lived. My companies never failed for lack of users or customers. They always failed for lack of understanding how to manage finances or, other more complex issues. And so in doing this correctly, man, you end up attracting people and you don't have to work nearly as hard. And so the gains that come from that become exponential really, really fast, because all at once you can decrease your cost of acquisition and increase your customer's lifetime. If done really right, you can increase their average purchase price. And so like when you move the needle a little bit on all three of those factors, they compound really fast. And so getting 10x results for our clients is something that was not uncommon.
This is also amazing, man, and I can't wait to push this episode out and go back and re-listen myself. If you would, just really quick, let's just do another, super quick overview of the 6 steps for people listening one more time, and then we'll start closing it out.
Perfect. So the first 3 steps are really about capturing information, right? So first, about the background of the company, who, what, where, when, why. Second, what makes a powerful brand? How is your brand aligned to what you think is powerful? And third is resonance. How do you hope your brand resonates with your audience? What do you want them to think and feel? And you want to make sure that you write all of those things down. Then the next step, step 4, is pillars, and you're grouping all of those, everything that you wrote, you're grouping all of them and finding patterns and group them into 3 buckets. It's important to stick to 3. I've had people argue with me and say it could be 4, it could be 20, and it can't. So we can have a long, call me, email me if you want to be told why you're wrong. I'm fine with that. And then step 5 is expression. So now that you have the pillars that are this is the foundation of your brand, how do you express that into language, ritual, and symbol? And then last is application. Now that you know how to express your brand in language, ritual, and symbol, what media is that applied into? And how can you apply it in a way that it's still staying connected to the expression dynamics, to the pillars? A couple of bonus tips and kind of best practices. The thing that you're getting at here are what I call unknown knowns, right? People talk a lot about known knowns versus known unknowns, and then unknown unknowns. Nobody talks about unknown knowns, right? What we're talking about is latent information, things that you know and don't even realize that you know. And we're expressing latent information all the time. This is actually how the FBI interrogates people. That's why if you ever get arrested, just don't talk at all. Don't say anything other than lawyer, because it's never helping you. No matter how many times they make you think it's helping you, it's not. Because they're not trying to get the story. They're picking up latent information that you're revealing that you don't realize you're revealing, right? So this is designed to do the same thing. So because of that, it's best if you have someone else do it to you and have them be listening for what's true instead of what you want it to be. Because unconscious bias is strong, especially in things like how we talk about our business, right? It's going to change the world, and and we believe that shit. If you didn't, you wouldn't make all the sacrifices that you make. But the thing is you need an impartial third party to look at it and say, okay, yes, and here's kind of where the truth is in that. And then there's I'm going to put together a worksheet for the brand development stuff, and also some basic messaging ways that you can apply this for the community, and people can, I hope it's useful to people, and they can give me feedback or let me know what they think or argue with me about it.
I was going to say, I'm looking at a really nicely laid out PDF that says branding for dropouts, and there's even a couple worksheets at the end. So is this something we can post in the show notes for people?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'm excited for it to be helpful with people. And I'm excited to kind of hear people's input as well. Maybe stuff I missed, or opportunity to explain why, kind of some of the things I've learned over the years in doing this stuff. But more than anything, this stuff is super powerful. The people with lots of money and lots of influence know about this stuff, and typically are the only ones with access to this stuff. And I just really like the idea of, people, especially dropouts who are making a lot of sacrifices to do things a different way and kind of create an alternate reality. I think they should have access to it too.
Amazing, man. I love it. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
So I'm super active on LinkedIn. So through my LinkedIn is really easy. And then through Dropouts, you feel free to tag me. And those are probably your two best bets. I love connecting with people. I love talking to people. A lot of all this stuff that I've learned has been honed. I was talking to an entrepreneur yesterday about how important it is to just get out and talk to people about your ideas. Because as you talk about it, it's mental sparring, and you're honing the ideas, and they're getting better all the time. So I love to talk about them, and I'd love to talk with you guys and anybody listening, and help them kind of hone in their ideas as well.
Amazing, man. Well, Successful Dropouts, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around the most, and you've been hanging out with Kylan and Damien today, learning everything the traditional system never taught you. For everything we talked about today, visit successfuldropout.com and type Damien into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish.